Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to start a new topic, that is the bearings. So we are not yet covered fully the different types of gears. We will be covering that after T1 exam. So what we'll be looking at today is the rolling contact bearings. So before we enter into topic, we'll just general interaction related to what is bearing. What do you mean by bearing? Means what is the main purpose of bearing? Can somebody tell? Means bearing as a machine element, where it will be used. Or you can give some examples where bearings are being used.
So bearing is something where you want to keep one part constant and at the same time, like with the same axis, you want to keep the other part rotating. So bearing is used for the rotation, like the rotation of a frictionless thing.
So I would say relative motion. One part stationary, other part moving.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
both are moving,
yeah.
but
The
there is a
relative
relative
motion.
motion.
Yeah,
Okay, and
I
this
wasn't
motion,
getting a
what
proper
you?
word.
Right. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay, Karthik. So okay, you talked about rotary motion. Any other motion is possible? So you're saying to resist wear and tear. To resist wear and tear and support shaft. Okay, so apart from rotary motion, any other type of bearing have you seen?
Thrust bearing.
Thrust bearing, can you give example of thrust bearing?
Like it is also rotary motion only, but generally the bearings are for connecting two shaft in one another. But in thrust bearing, it is basically like they are moving in different above one another. Like one plane can move above the other
Yeah,
by
can you
using.
give some example, one common
Uh,
day-to-day example, which we all of us are well aware of, where thrust
if we
bearing is?
want to make a rotating table, so we can use a thrust
Right.
bearing over there.
Yeah, that's right. Rotating table is example. Still more common example.
Uh, common thing.
Anybody knows where thrust bearing is used in our house? So in thrust bearing, as we are going to see later, that thrust bearing is where the load is along the axis of the bearing. So common ceiling fan is a good example of thrust bearing. So their load is, yeah. So you just told simultaneously with me. Yeah. So ceiling fan is example. Okay. Anything else you want to say about? Can you give examples where these bearings are used? Wherever you have seen them. Some industrial applications where bearings are used. Journal bearings. Okay. Journal bearings on the shafts. Any other application? We have so many. Every machine will have a bearing somewhere or other place.
Sir, in washing machine are thrust bearings used?
Washing machine. It depends on your rotary. Is there are two types of washing machines now.
So say top loaded.
Yeah, top loaded rotary is at the bottom, I believe. So there it will be thrust loading, mostly thrust loading.
Yes, sir.
Whereas in front loading, I think the rotor is axis is straight, so there will be because of cantilever action there will be a radial load. Yeah. So washing machine. Then Aditya has given IC engine. So where in IC engine? Roller cover cycle ring. Okay. So cycle wheel. Roller covers. I don't know what is roller cover. Okay.
Sir, sorry, it is a roller conveyor.
Roller conveyor. Okay. Rollers of roller conveyor. They will have bearings. That's right. Lathe machine. Yeah, I expected that to be first. Okay. Where in lathe machine bearing is there?
So
Spindle.
spindle.
Right. Yeah, so some of these are the examples. Out of these examples, what we have seen, the first example that our friend has given is a different than others. So does anybody know what is the difference between journal bearing and the other types of bearing that we listed? Pen. Pen is bit strange example. Pen, where is the bearing? Okay, that's okay. We'll come to that pen later. The journal bearing, how it is different from other bearings that we have seen. Okay, I think what Soham meant maybe pen is ballpoint pen. Nib. Oh. Nib as in ink pen. Okay, we'll come to pen later. But does anybody know what is a journal bearing and how it is different than the other types of bearings that are listed here? Except
So
maybe IC
journal
engine can
bearing.
also. Yeah, continue.
So journal bearings doesn't have ball bearings in it, for it has lubrication.
Right. So there are certain bearings where there are no additional rolling elements. So as you look at the title of our topic, it is rolling contact bearings or rolling element bearings. So there are one class of bearings where there is rolling contact elements like balls or cylinders or conical elements, rolling elements, and other types of bearings where there is no such element. You directly have contact between the rotating two parts which are having relative motion with respect to each other. So those are called as the sliding contact bearings, which we are going to study in the another module. And the one which we are going to discuss are the rolling element bearing or rolling contact bearings. So that is broadly the classification. And you can read about that more in the classroom. I will just cursorily go through as to, and later on, after we complete both the types of bearings, we will have detailed understanding about the differences between the two types. Okay, before we go quickly, can Soham say what is pen nib, how it is related to bearing? Or somebody, some of your friend can just throw light as to how or where pen has a bearing. If you are talking about ballpoint pen, the ball is rolling on paper, so one may call it as a bearing type. No, in ballpoint pen there is a single ball which is at the front, which smears the ink over the paper. So that is technically it is not ball bearing. It means it's functionally it is not any load bearing part, and it is not it only one aspect of bearing it has is that all bearings are made to minimize the friction between the relative motion. Okay, that is an important part. So that we are trying to minimize the friction between the parts which are moving relative to each other. So there, this ballpoint pen has got that feature that because of the ball which is present, you can move the pen more fast than the ink pen or the nib pen. What is that? The fountain pen, as compared to that ballpoint pen, you can slide faster on the paper because of the reduced friction. But apart from that, it is not technically a bearing, or from the engineering point of view, the construction and other things are much different. It's not a bearing, it's a sort of a different type of a machine, if you can call it. Okay, so let's move into the types of bearings. So as we said, there are two types of bearing, that is the rolling contact bearings. They are also called as anti-friction bearing because of the very low friction. Of course, every type of bearing has got low coefficient of friction. However, rolling contact bearings, in certain cases like ball bearings, you have very minimal coefficient of friction, and that is why they are called as anti-friction bearing. But that doesn't mean that they have zero friction. Always friction is always there. And as we are going to see, they are depending on the rolling element, type of rolling element, they can be classified as ball bearings, roller bearings, or pin bearings. And sliding contact bearings, which we are going to see next, there is no separate element, rolling element in these bearings. So they are bush bearings and journal bearings. We are going to discuss about them later, so I'm not discussing them now. The rolling contact bearing, if you look at the construction, then if you look at this particular diagram, then there is of course a rolling element, which is in this case shown as a ball. It could be a roller like in this particular figure. So it could be a roller or it could be a ball. The ball is held between two parts. One is called as outer race and the other one is called as inner race. So either of the two can be rotating, in the sense inner race can be fixed and outer may be rotating, or outer may be fixed and inner may be rotating. In this case, the outer race is fixed in the bearing housing. So bearing housing is something which holds the bearing, and the inner race is fitted onto the shaft. So that is how you get motion. And in order to hold the balls at a equal distance, so that the balls do not move radially or circumferentially with respect to each other, you have got the retainer ring, so which holds the ball with respect to each other. And there are other parts related to the bearing housing, so that we are not concerned at this particular time. But you may require them in your project, the gearbox design project. So you may have to consider how to select the housing for that your bearing and other parts, which we are not covering in the classroom sessions, but that you have to search and find on your own. The bearing is always, in order to locate the bearing, the shaft or whatever component it is mounted on, it is, you always find there is a groove. So if this is a shaft on which you want to mount the bearing, you will always find that there will be a step so that you can locate the bearing onto this component. So this is called as a bearing seat, in the sense the step that is made, so that is seat for the bearing, and you always have a sort of step so as to locate the bearing with respect to the shaft. So although they are all details, but when you are actually you have to fit a bearing onto the shaft, you have to select what should be the step size, what should be the corner radius of the step. So all those fine things you should investigate when you are designing your project, that is a gearbox design, which has been released last week or this week. Yeah, so there are different types of bearings. So each bearing has got certain types of advantages and disadvantages. So I want you to study them. I'm just going through the different major types. The first is a deep groove ball bearing. The second is a cylindrical roller ball bearing. The angular contact ball bearing, self-aligning ball bearing. There is a spherical roller bearing, taper roller bearing, and thrust ball bearing. So each of the bearing has got certain advantages and disadvantages. So I'm just taking here the deep groove ball bearing. So in case of deep groove ball bearing or DGBB deep groove ball bearing, you have advantage that this is the most commonly used ball bearing. So what your commonly used devices you see, you will always find that deep groove ball bearing will be used. So it has advantage that it can take relatively high loads at high speeds. And because of the balls which are having point contact with the races, so there is a minimal noise. So it can, so noise is less as compared to the other types of bearings. So that is one of the advantage. And if you look at the disadvantage of this particular bearing, the one disadvantage is that it cannot take much of the axial load. So it can mainly take the radial load, and it is not self-aligning. Which means that during the manufacturing or during the assembly of this particular bearing, you have to have very accurate alignment or accurate alignment of the axis of the bearing with respect to shaft. Because if there is some misalignment of the shaft with respect to the bearing axis, then there will be, this bearing will get damaged. And also it is less rigid. It means that it is as compared to the other types of bearing, this bearing will have more deflection after the load is applied onto it. So that is because of the deep groove. So that since the groove is made deep, so that there is a better contact and less chance of slippage or more load carrying capacity comes from that deep groove. But because of the deep groove, the inner and outer race, they become sort of weaker or more resilient or more flexible. And that is why these bearings are more, less rigid as compared to others. Similarly, every bearing will have some advantage and disadvantage which are given in the textbook. So I want you to study them, and the purpose is that you should be able to select a bearing for a given application. So given application, you should be able to, you should know which bearing is to be selected for that application based on features, pluses and minuses of each bearing type. Okay, so now this particular SKF is very well-known manufacturer internationally in the bearing manufacturers, in the bearing manufacturing. So I will just show a short clip of video where they are showing where the trend in the rolling element bearing technology. So as we know that industry 4.0 technologies are taking over everywhere. So SKF is also introducing them in their bearing design. So we'll just, it's maybe 2.5 minute video. We'll just look at that video. I think I will have to stop the presentation for you to get the sound. Just 1 minute. I'm just searching for the tab. So there are so many tabs open, so I'm not able to select the YouTube tab. Okay. Okay, so I cannot share a login with tab with different login because I opened that video with different login. Okay, so this video, what we are looking at is how the Industry 4.0 technologies are being used by SKF, one of the leading bearing manufacturer. Are you able to listen the sound?
No, sir.
Okay, that becomes.
One common denominator is always the demand for lightweight. Everywhere you turn, things are turning around you, spinning, rotating. Take a look. Imagine how many billions of rotating machines are at work in factories and homes, on the roads, in the fields, and in the air. Our job is knowing those machines inside and out, ensuring they rotate reliably. Even though each industry has different needs, each customer its unique demands, one common denominator is always the demand for lightweight products that produce less friction. Minimizing friction is what we've done for more than a century and what we'll continue to do. It all began with a robust bearing design. That design was born from a dedication to research and development across all industries. R&D isn't just about product development. By testing new technologies in our own factories, we can take what we've learned and put it into practice out in the field. The Industry 4.0 revolution has already begun at SKF. Digitalization in our factories is improving efficiency and performance, making processes smarter. The bearings themselves are becoming increasingly smarter. By monitoring vibration, load, temperature, and speed of bearings, we can tell a lot about the condition of rotating machinery. New technology can now even provide that data instantly, which means maintenance can be planned and problems fixed before breakdowns occur. And that adds up to more uptime, a must in any competitive industry. Analytics are critical to those who perform the maintenance on the machines and design the products inside. It's key to collaborate with customers in the design process to make improvements for their specific needs. If there was just a little less friction and less weight in all we designed and built, imagine the possibilities.
We are truly everywhere.
And that's never going to change.
Because everything around us
will keep turning,
Spinning, rotating.
We are creating a world of reliable rotation.
So our crusade
against friction and weight continues.
That work will never be done.
Will never be done.
Will never be done.
It's a never-ending story.
Okay, so in this video, somewhere we have seen that the bearings are becoming more smarter. So you have more sensors which monitor their temperature, the vibration levels, and that is used to forecast if the maintenance is required in these bearings and so on. So that is something which is you have to consider. So all the devices that you will be engineering in future are those who are coming right now in the market. So they are becoming more and more smarter and more friendly to the operating people in order to reduce the maintenance and to prevent, to increase their reliability. Yeah, so having seen this thing, let's go back to our discussion. So what today essentially we are going to do is for bearing design, we are using essentially some specific terms which are specific to the bearing design. So we'll understand all those meaning of these different terms and understand how they are utilized in the design. So let's move ahead. Okay, so we have a quiz. I pasted the link and you have the question in front of you. Okay, so let's look at the answer. Okay, so the option 2 is the correct answer in the sense it is not an advantage of the deep groove ball bearing. So deep groove ball bearing can operate under high loads and high speeds, and it also has less noise. However, it is more flexible. So rigidity is less in the case of deep groove ball bearing because of presence of deeper grooves. Okay, so let's move ahead. So we will come across what is known as static load capacity of the bearing. So static load capacity of the bearing, as the name suggests, is the capacity of the bearing to take load in the static condition, that is in the non-rotating condition. Now it is defined as follows. So static load current, it is related to the rigidity of the bearing or the stiffness of the bearing. So it is the load corresponding to the maximum total permanent deformation. So it is related to the deformation of the bearing. Here deformation of the bearing means mainly the balls are the one which are going to deform, balls and races which hold these balls. And the deformation is kept as 0.0001 of the ball diameter or of the roller diameter in general. So that is defined as static load capacity. So if you look into any bearing manufacturer's catalog, for every bearing you will have its static load capacity would be mentioned in the catalog. We'll see later at the actual catalog. That reminds me that bearing design is different from other types of machine element design, in the sense we do not really design a bearing, we select it from manufacturer's catalog. So the designing boils down to selecting a suitable model from the bearing manufacturer's catalog. It is something like selection of the chain drive. So you don't design the chain drive, you select it, or the belt drive, you select the standard belt or standard chain from the one which is available. So similar case is there for the bearing. So you select a bearing. So when you are selecting the bearing, one of the parameters that influence your design or selection is the static load capacity. Now static load capacity doesn't check the crushing of the bearing. Means it is not the load at which the bearing balls or races they break or they crush, but that is the load where the permanent deformation of the system is less than 0.0001 times the roller diameter. And it is given by an equation which is known as Strybeck's equation. So we'll derive this particular equation. And before that, just to note that for the purpose of selecting the bearing, you don't have to use this calculation. The bearing manufacturer has already tabulated the static load capacity of their different bearing models into the design data book or their manufacturer's catalog, and they determine it by experimental means. So if the load is to be determined experimentally, what is the need of this theory? So just to make the point clear, that in order to, somebody like the bearing manufacturers wants to do a set of experiments to decide what is the static load capacity of the bearing. So in order to design the experiment, so if you want to decide any, if you want to conduct any experiment, you have to properly design it so that you understand what are the parameters which influence your the parameter which you are going to measure through the experiment. So in this case, somebody wants to measure what is the static load capacity, the load at which the maximum means the maximum deformation of the system is less than 0.0001 times the ball diameter. So one should know which are the different parameters to be used. That means what range of diameters to be used, what range of ball diameters to be used, what is the load range that is to be used. In order to do that, you must have some theoretical understanding of the system. So what this Strybeck's equation does is provides the theoretical background using which you know which are the parameters that are involved in the static load capacity. So why we are looking into the derivation, because as I said, in your design, you are never going to require this equation. Why you are looking it is because in the future, you will be coming across some, you'll be designing some machine element on your own, or you may be trying to modify some machine element. So at that time, you should be having the logic of how do we study a particular system and how do you evolve the parameters which are involved. For example, the static load capacity. So if you have to theoretically calculate that static load capacity, how will you do it from basic principles? So that is what we'll be looking at. So let's look at how this Tribex equation is derived, which, and we'll on the way we'll understand what are the different parameters which affect the static load capacity. And as I said, that design data book will give you the value of the static load capacity, which is denoted by symbol C naught. Okay, so let's look at the derivation. So what you see on the upper figure is a bearing which is subjected to load C naught. So C naught is the one which we are trying to find out. So corresponding to C naught, these balls will have permanent deformation of 0.0001 times their diameter. So the force, vertical force C naught, is getting resisted by the reaction which is generated at each of the ball, and the central ball takes reaction, gives the reaction of P1. The one adjacent to it, so because of symmetry, there will be two balls which are symmetrically resisting at a particular angle. So they are providing P2, and next level is going to provide P3, and so on. So here the angle between the balls is beta. So there are some assumptions which are done in this particular derivation. So the first assumption is that the balls are equally placed. Which is taken care in the manufactured bearings by the retainer rings which space the balls equally. The second thing is we are assuming that the races, that is the inner and outer race, are rigid. So although they may have some flexibility, we are considering only the deformation of the ball for evaluating this particular capacity. And the third thing is only the rolling elements or the balls which are the balls on upper side do not take the load. So which is obvious. So above the center line, we are considering all these balls, they are not taking any load, which essentially means that which is a corollary of this races being rigid. If the races are not rigid, then you will get this, means exaggerated, you will get a oval shape of this race. So because of which the upper balls also may get loaded, and lower balls, some of the lower ones will not get loaded. So that part is taken care. So the figure which is below, okay, let's first develop some equation and then we'll go to the figure which is below. So using the equation, we can write C naught, which is the capacity which we want to determine. We can write that in terms of P1, P2 and other cases. So it will be P1 plus twice P2 into cos of beta plus twice P3 into cos of 2 beta and so on. So that is the first thing. Now the point to be remained is how do you determine this P1 and P2? So we have to relate this P1 and P2 means the load which is coming on the ball to the deformation of the ball. So have you studied any theory which gives you deformation of a sphere when it is subjected to contact force? Have you studied any theory? So you come across any theory which gives you deformation of a sphere when it is subjected to contact load. So essentially here balls are pushed by the races and there is only point contact.
Hertz equation.
That's right, Poonam. Yeah. So we just covered that in the gear design. So for the gear design, we use the Hertz equation. So the same equation gets applied for here also. So in the Hertz equation, however, what we have seen is that when sphere is getting subjected to load, we consider the deformation happens over the distance of 2 times b, and there we were considering this b in order to calculate the contact stress. In this particular case, we are interested in, so in this case, the ball will get flattened both from top and bottom. So how much is the difference in its diameter or the vertical height of the ball? That is what we are interested in. So from Hertz theory, so this particular aspect we did not study in the Hertz theory. We were more interested in contact stress. So we just calculated this b, 2b, and then we calculated the stress based on that. But how much is the delta which happens because of this deformation, that also can be established from the same theory. So from Hertz theory, we get that this delta by which the balls are getting deformed, it is proportional to p raised to 2 by 3. So that is this, but this theory part we have not studied, but I'm just giving you just like that. Therefore, if delta 1 is the deformation of the ball number 1, then that will be given as some constant k, which we'll introduce later on, multiplied by p1 raised to 2 by 3. Delta 2 will be equal to k times p2 raised to 2 by 3, and so on. So note that these are diametrical compression of the bearing. Now what is happening is that when these balls are deforming, I'll just zoom up this part. So what you see is that central ball is deforming by delta 1 amount. So the race will come down along the vertical center line by distance delta 1, which we just now have expressed in terms of the load which is coming on that bearing. Since we are considering the race is rigid, so it is not going to change its circular shape. So what is going to happen is that this entire circle is going to move down by a distance of delta 1. So whatever is the central ball's deformation, by same amount, the center line of the inner race is going to come down by the same amount. So what you see here, corresponding to the ball 2's location, its displacement corresponding to that point will be delta 1. So every point it will be delta 1. However, the deformation of this particular ball will be in its diametrical plane or in its diametrical direction. So that is delta 2. So delta 2 is in this direction, and what deformation we just now saw, that is delta 1, is in the vertical direction. And we can see that this is a right angle triangle where this angle is beta. So in the sense, this delta 2 is a function of delta 1 and beta. So we can write delta 2 as delta 1 multiplied by cos of beta. Similarly, we can write delta 3, which is coming here. So delta 3 will be delta 1 times cos of 2 beta, because here the angle is 2 beta. So all the deformations we can write in terms of delta 1 itself. So delta 2 can be written in terms of delta 1 and so on. So we'll use this relation to simplify the expression which we just now wrote here. So we are looking at this expression which we are trying to simplify. So one part of the story is that we are using Hertz theory. So Hertz theory gives us the relation between deformation and the load. So this, if you take this further, so we'll get delta 2 by delta 1 in terms of load will be P2 by P1 raised to 2 by 3. Therefore, we get P2 equal to P1 times delta 2 by delta 1 raised to 3 by 2. So I'm just taking this side. That means I'm writing P2 in terms of P1. And we have already seen here that from this expression, we know that delta 2 by delta 1 will be equal to cos of beta. So this will be P1 into cos of beta raised to 3 by 2. So we get P2 expression in this form. Similarly, we will have P3 equal to P1 into cos of 2 beta raised to 3 by 2. So now we can write this particular expression in terms of only beta and P1. So from number of unknowns, so earlier it was P1, P2, P3. So there are as many number of balls, that many unknowns we are considering. Now we can write everything in terms of only one unknown, that is P1. So the C0 now can be written as P1 plus 2 times P1 cos beta raised to 3 by 2 multiplied by cos of beta plus 2 times P1 cos of 2 beta raised to 3 by 2 into cos of 2 beta and so on. So for all number of balls, we can continue. So this can be simplified. So C0 will be equal to P1 times 1 plus 2 times cos beta raised to 5 by 2 plus 2 times cos 2 beta raised to 5 by 2 and so on. So what you see here that the term in the square bracket is just a function of how many number of balls are there and what is the angular difference between those balls. So I will just write this as P1 times capital M, where capital M is this particular within parenthesis term. Now, if you look at the the study was when it was carried out, it was observed that this factor M is linked with the number of balls, obviously, because beta depends on number of balls. So somebody started to study what is the relation between this that parenthetic term and number of balls. So if I write the number of balls as 8, 10, 12, 15. So this is where some sort of understanding of the system comes in picture, and one calculates the factor M, which is we have written here. So it can be seen that it is obviously it increases with the number of balls, but there is some proportion which can be has been observed there. So if you take the ratio of number of balls to this factor M, you will find that this ratio almost remains constant. So just to why I'm giving this table is for illustration. So one can observe that the factor M, which is one of the unknown in our equation. So this equation, this factor M can be written as simple multiplier, some number of balls multiplied by certain factor. So if you look at this particular level, this particular factor is somewhere close to 4.35. So in developing the Strybeck's equation, so Strybeck considered this particular ratio Z by capital M as nearly a constant, and the constant value he has taken as phi. So when you consider that, you can write this equation for static load capacity in terms of the load which is coming on the central ball multiplied by the number of balls divided by phi. So that is what we are considering. Now what remains to be found out is how much is the load P1 which will cause the deformation. Now here will come to the definition of the static load capacity. So the definition of static load capacity tells us that it is that load at which the permanent deformation of ball is 0.0001 times the diameter of the ball. So what remains to be found out is how much. So the P1 is the load acting on the central ball. So how much load will cause permanent deformation of the central ball of equal to 0.0001 times diameter. So that is relatively easier to determine. It has been observed that this particular P1 corresponding to 0.0001 times diameter can be written in terms of some constant multiplied by d square. So again, here some kind of theoretical background is there, which is not explained here. So we are directly saying that this load at which the deformation is equal to 0.0001 is proportionate to the square of diameter of the ball. And the K factor, it depends on different factors. So obviously it will depend on the radii of curvature of the two parts. Two parts in contacts. And it will also depend on the material of construction. So what is the material? So depending on what is the material which is used for the bearing, this particular factor will depend and differ. Also it will differ as per the geometry of the ball. So if you put this particular, substitute this factor here, you get the equation for static load capacity as K d square into Z divided by phi. So that is, this is the expression which is known as Strybeck's equation. And the utility of this expression or this particular equation is that we know, looking at this equation, that when you are designing the experiment, one of the important factor is the diameter of the ball. So when you are choosing different bearings for doing the testing, you should take a large variety of bearings which are having different ball sizes, because that is one of the important factor. And another thing is, if you're considering the same size of the ball, we should also considering bearings which are having different number of balls. So the number of balls and the diameter of the ball is some of the important factors. And also the material of construction, the K factor indicates that we should choose the bearings which are having different materials of construction. So for conducting the experiment, in order to determine the C0 or to get to understand how do we design the different series of bearings, this particular parameter needs to be taken into account. So once you decide by experimentation certain diameter of ball, certain spacing between the ball and certain material gives a certain load capacity, and you want to know how to double, if somebody wants to know how to double the capacity, then this particular Strybeck's equation would give us a good clue. Now this, as you are going to see later, this static load capacity is not directly used in the calculation. In the calculation, we use what is known as dynamic load capacity of the bearing. So what is the main use of this static load capacity? So the C0, it essentially means that you are limiting the deformation. And it implies that if you are working within the C0 limit, you will get less deformation, that is the deformations which are very small, and as a result of which you will get the smooth operation because of the less deformation. So smooth, I mean less vibration. So essentially that is what the static load capacity essentially means, that without causing vibrations or less noise. So if you work your bearing within the C0 value, so note that the C0 is calculated in static condition, whereas the bearing is going to operate in the dynamic condition. But even in dynamic condition, if you have selected a bearing which has got the sufficient value of C0, then you will get a smooth operation and with less noise. So that is the inference that one has to draw from the static load capacity. So to summarize, one of the important design parameter is static load capacity of the bearing. Since it is static load capacity, it doesn't have direct bearing on selecting the bearing. So it indirectly comes in. How it comes in, we will see later. So this C0 is not does not have any direct influence on the dynamic load capacity of the bearing, but it has got indirect influence. And however, ensuring that your load is around C0 ensures that you will get very smooth operation of the bearing because of the less deformations that are caused at this particular load. If you are not interested in noise, or means if the noise and smoothness of operation is not critical for you, you can go much higher values. So you can go up to much higher values than the C0. Of course, that is going to, in addition to noise and other things, it is going to reduce the life of the bearing. But that part we are going to discuss next. So before we move next, let's have another quiz on this particular topic. Okay, so this should be fairly simple question. Okay, so we get so the static load capacity is related to permanent deformation. So that is the correct answer. It is not related to crushing failure. So that is something is the correct answer. So I believe somebody is going option 3 by mistake. Okay, so now let's move to another important design parameter, that is the life of bearing. So let's introduce the concept of life of bearing. So for certain application, let's say that you want 1 million revolution as the life of the bearing. That is, the bearing should not fail before successfully operating for 1 million revolutions. So being the very nature of uncertainty because of the contact stress and the number of elements which are involved, this particular life of bearing is always having some kind of statistical nature. So you can guarantee that certain proportion of the bearings, so given 100 bearings, so you can express that as statistically or probabilistically that certain percentage will survive for 1 million revolutions and remaining will not survive. So the life is always, for the bearing, is always expressed as a statistical number or in terms of statistical number. So for that purpose, let's consider a life of graph expressed in terms of a particular manner. So here on the horizontal axis, I'm writing life of bearing in number of revolutions. On the vertical axis, I am putting how many number of bearings are failing. So percentage of bearings in operation. So let's put here 100%. That means all bearings are surviving. Somewhere 50%, 90%, and so on. And here on this axis, it is number of revolutions. So let's put it as something like increasing order, 10 to power 4, 10 to power 5, 10 to power 6, and so on. So now let me draw two curves. So one curve is, let's say, in this particular manner. Another curve is this particular manner. So this is, let's say, curve 1, and this is curve 2. So which do you think is the trend you will observe for the life of bearing in terms of how many percentage of bearings are going to will remain in operation for a certain life? So this, so can you think and tell which is the trend which will be correct, 1 or 2?
2.
Oh,
Okay, so why it should be 2?
Sir,
Yeah, Akshay.
like as the life is increasing, even less number of bearings will survive that long.
As the life is so on the horizontal axis, you are having the life. Let's say we want somebody wants 10 to power 5 bearings. So I'm just taking the trend here. So it gets certain amount of lights. Let's say 60% remain operational. And if you are wanting life which is larger than that, then for that larger amount of life, you will get only 40% of bearings will survive. So as you require larger and larger, means the answer is correct. That answer is trend 2 is correct. So if you require larger and larger life, the number of bearings which will survive till that time will be smaller and smaller. So if you want, let's say, only 10 revolutions, then you will find that 100% of bearings will survive. So no bearing will fail in 10 revolutions. If you want 1000, then little more will fail, and so on. So the trend is as shown in equation number 2, and that is what is the actual. So actual failure curve, if you draw, it is of this type, a little curved one, and that is what we are going to see in the next slide. So that is that comes to the definition of rating life of bearing. So in the in the context of rolling element bearing, the life is termed in terms of what is known as a rating life of the bearing. So let's understand what is the rating life, and the notation, if you look here, it's something peculiar, L10. So what is meaning of this 10? L stands for life, obviously, and 10 stands for something. Let's understand what is that. So for a group of bearings, so if you consider, let's say 1000 bearings or 100 bearings, which are identical, so we are considering identical bearing, it is the number of revolutions that, okay, in addition, there is some more qualifier which we'll read later, that 90% of the bearings will complete or exceed before first evidence of crack. So L10 life, when you say that a bearing has L10 life of 1 million revolutions, so the life will be specified as L10 equal to 1 million revolutions. So million revolutions is generally is abbreviated in this course and everywhere as 1 million revolutions. So the life of the bearing. So life of the bearing is specified in terms of L10 life. So when you specify that the life is 1 million revolution, L10 life is 1 million revolution. That means if you take 100 bearings of identical size of that particular model, 90% will survive till 1 million revolution. So this 10 indicates the number of failures. So that is percentage of failure. So if you want to write the definition in terms of failures, it is that life within which 10% of bearings will fail. It is written here in a positive sense that in the 1 million revolution, 90% of bearings are going to survive the 1 million revolutions without failing. So here L10 will correspond to 90% of bearings which will survive. Similarly, L50 will correspond to 50% of bearings which will survive, and so on. So usually L10 is not usually, but in the bearing manufacturer's catalog, as we are going to see immediately next, that this particular life is always expressed with L10 definition. So the life which is mentioned in the bearing manufacturer's catalog, it corresponds to L10. That means 90% of the bearings will survive to whatever life the bearing manufacturer's catalog is guaranteeing. So that is the statistical nature that you have to understand. And this rating life is also has got some other terms. So it is also called as catalog life. So in some different books or in literature, you will find this being used. It is also called as minimum life. But life of bearing is always related, is a statistical term. So it will depend on the probability of certain number of bearings to survive for that much time. So that is what is mentioned here. So 1050 represents the percent of failures. And the survival will be given as 100 minus that particular number. So any question on this particular concept? Okay, so we have Okay, so here the correct answer is the first one. So rating life of L10 will be achieved by 90% of the bearings, and 10% will fail within that time. So for some application, you are more stricter requirement, that is you want very reliable operation. So it is essentially this number is related to reliability. So smaller the number, higher the reliability. So that is what we are looking here. Okay, so next we will look into another important term. So that is the critical term for the selection of the bearing. So that is known as dynamic load capacity of the bearing. So let's see how this particular dynamic load capacity is defined. So the dynamic load capacity of the bearing is the radial load for radial bearing and thrust load for thrust bearing that can be carried out for minimum life. So minimum life here, it means that L10 life of 1 million revolution. So just to rephrase this particular thing. So if you have two types of bearings, one is a radial bearing, which is essentially meant to take only radial load, but it can also take some kind of axial or thrust load, and there is a thrust load, thrust bearing, which is essentially meant to take the thrust load, but it can also take some radial load. So for the definition of the dynamic load capacity, which is given in the bearing manufacturer's catalog, for radial bearing, it is pure radial load. For thrust bearing, it is pure thrust load. So in this class, we will be mostly discussing about the radial bearings. And so here the dynamic load capacity would be a pure radial load. So when you apply that much load, that particular bearing will survive for 1 million revolutions. So it will be, so for this, so either of the case, the L10 equal to 1 million revolutions. So that is what this definition means. So when you apply a load of C, which is dynamic load capacity, the bearing will survive, will have L10 life of 1 million revolution. That means 90% of bearing will have life of 1 million revolutions. So that is what dynamic load capacity of the bearing. And the bearing manufacturer's catalog gives both the static load capacity C0 as well as the dynamic load capacity C. So when you see the C, so this life part is not mentioned in the bearing manufacturer's catalog. So it implies that when you apply that much load, the load of C, you will get L10 life of 1 million revolutions, or 1 million revolution life will be attained by 90% of the bearings of that particular model. So that means if you are using 10 bearings of a particular model, 9 of those bearings will definitely guaranteed to run for 1 million revolutions, and one bearing may fail before reaching 1 million revolutions. So that is the practical understanding of this particular term. Of course, it comes in the calculation for the selection of the bearings, which we are going to see next. Okay, so since we are repeatedly saying manufacturer's catalog, so let's have a look at how the manufacturer's catalog. So the manufacturer's catalog is given in the extract of that is available to you in the design data book. So I will just go to. So this is how this is an extract taken from Escape Bearings catalog. So if you look at the catalog, you will have some dimensions of the bearing which are given here. So first 3 column corresponds to principal directions of the bearing. And then you have the 2 loads. So C is the dynamic load capacity and C0 is the static load capacity. So when you say that this particular bearing, and each bearing has got certain designations. So if you take, for example, model which has designation Escape 6000, this particular bearing will have a dynamic load capacity of 4620. That means when you apply load of 4620 newtons, 90% of bearing will run for 1 million revolutions. and it has got value of C naught as 1960. That means that when you apply load of 1960, the permanent deformation of the bearing will be equal to 0.0001 times the diameter of the ball for that particular bearing. So that is what is given here. So this particular extract which is given in the design data book, it doesn't give other dimensions like diameter of ball and other details. If you look at actual SKF bearing catalog, you will find all those dimensional details will be available to you. Okay, so so as you can see, for our design calculation, we require C and C naught, and that is what we'll be considering. Okay, so again, we have a quiz here. Just answer to this question. Okay, so we have, so both of above is the correct answer. So it is given in the manufacturer's catalog, and also it corresponds to minimum life. So here minimum life is a term which is used to say L10 life. So we get L10 life of 1 million revolution. Now, if you look at the definition, it talks about pure radial load and pure thrust load. So in actual case, it is difficult to find a situation where you have pure radial. It means there are situations where there is pure axial or pure radial load, but there is always a chance because of some misalignment and other things, some kind of axial load coming on radial bearing and radial load coming on thrust bearing. And in some situations, like you have seen in the force analysis of the gears, so helical gears, so there is bound to have, along with the radial load, there will be always an axial load will also come in picture. So you have to survive both radial and axial load, whereas the bearing manufacturer's catalog only gives talks in terms of radial load for radial bearings. So suppose a radial bearing has to take, in addition to certain radial load, and some amount of axial load. So how do you combine this radial and axial load? So that is the next part. So that is known as an equivalent load. So it is simply called as equivalent load. So it means that equivalent radial load. So you calculate the equivalent radial load. Similar concept can be there for the thrust bearing. But here for this particular course, we are discussing mainly or only the radial bearings. So for radial bearings, even though both axial and radial load may be acting, you will be converting them into an equivalent load, equivalent radial load, so that you can use the bearing manufacturer's catalog. So how do you combine this radial and axial load? There is one part related to that. So let's look into that. So the equivalent dynamic load is, it's also denoted by symbol Fe. E stands for equivalent and F is the load. So Fe is the equivalent radial load that does the same damage as Fa and Fr taken together. So Fa is the axial load. So this Fa is axial load, and this Fr is the radial load. So when you have both axial and radial load acting on a radial bearing, you convert them into what is known as equivalent load. How do you do that is given, explained here. So simply put, this Fe is written in terms of what is known as XVFR plus Y times Fa. So that is the formula you'll find in design data book. So we'll see how this formula is arrived at, and that is for that purpose, in order to solve the problem, that is how do you combine the radial and axial load, the bearing manufacturer's catalog, they did some experiments. So they took the same bearing and subjected it to different levels of Fa and Fr. So one bearing they applied pure axial load, another bearing they applied pure radial load, and then there is some mix of proportion of Fa by Fr. And what you see here is the result of that experiment. So the circles here indicate the experimental data. In the sense, the bearings for a certain combination of Fa and Fr, they survived life of 1 million revolutions. So that is the requirement of the dynamic load. So each of these dots, those are the bearings which for a given combination of Fa and Fr have survived a life of 1 million revolutions. And a corresponding radial load where they survived the 1 million revolution is Fe. That means you took one set of bearing, that is bearing, which is subjected to both loads of Fa and Fr, and you took the same bearing, same model of the bearing, and it's subjected to pure radial load of Fe. So in this case, the first set is subjected to both Fa and Fr, the second is subjected to only radial load. You find out the survival. So this particular bearing survived for 1 million revolution, and this also survived for 1 million revolution. So you try to correspond this together, and that is what these circles represent. The vertical axis is the ratio Fe, that is the equivalent load divided by Fr times V. So V is something which is called as a race factor. In the definition of life of bearing, I skipped that particular part. So the life of bearing depends on whether the inner race is rotating or outer race is rotating. So depending on that, the factor changes. So the factor is 1 or smaller when the inner race is rotating, and it is 1.2 when the outer race is rotating. So inner race rotating is the most, many of the applications you will find the inner race will be rotating. The inner race stationary and outer rotating, the most common example is the car wheel. So where the wheel is rotating and the axle is stationary. So that in that particular way, that is where you will consider the V factor as 1.2. So in the definition of life of bearing, it was saying that the life corresponds to inner ring rotating and outer ring is stationary. So that is the part I think I did not discuss at that point. So this I wanted to add that. Okay, so this particular graph, what it represents is that on the y-axis, we have the equivalent load by Fr times V. On the horizontal axis, we have Fa by Fr, Fa by V times Fr. So if you plot that, you will get an interesting trend. You'll find that up to certain range, the equivalent load is independent of axial load. So since this is Fa by Fr, just ignore V. So for certain distance of Fa by Fr, that is certain proportion of Fa, the equivalent load is independent of Fa. So whatever is the value of Fa in this particular region, the equivalent load remains the same. So equivalent load only depends on the Fr value. And after that, this particular trend, it increases linearly. So there are two parts of this. So this particular trend can be, so if you want to express the y-axis with respect to x-axis, it has got two parts. So below certain value of FA by VFR, that is termed as E. So in the design data book, you will find that this particular term is termed as E. So when your FA by V times FR, that is a x-axis, is smaller than certain value E, the y-axis is equal to 1. So this corresponds to value of 1. And when you are having FA by FR greater than E, so you are in this zone, you get a straight line distribution. So that is equation of this particular line. So equation of line is y equal to mx plus c. The slope of this line is called factor y. So y equal to mx plus c. So x is FA by V times FR, and mx plus c is the y-intercept. So this particular distance is capital X factor. So that is the equation of this particular straight line. So x and y factors are determined experimentally by the bearing manufacturer, and they are supplied to you. And whether to use the above equation or the lower equation, it depends on what is the value of E. That is where the two graphs or the two trends, they separate each other. And this is where the static load capacity enters in picture. So this value of E, it depends on the value of C0. So depending on the value of C0, the E value will be different. So if you remember, C0 corresponds to the deformation of the bearing or the stiffness of the bearing. So if you are having values means beyond certain value of FA or below certain value of FA, you will find that the stiffness of bearing will influence your choice of FA, your choice of equivalent load expression. So you get two expressions here. So the first equation is FE equal to, if you multiply this V times FR, if you take to the next side, you will get FE equal to V times FR. And in the second equation, if you multiply it by V times FR, so this is equation number 1, and equation number 2 will be FE equal to X times VFR plus Y times FA. So whether to use above equation, this equation, or the below equation, it depends on the value of small e, which depends on the factor C0. So we'll take numerical example where this particular part will become more clear. I think I went little rapidly in this part, so I could not explain properly. So in the next lecture, we'll again start with this particular graph, and we'll just explain it more properly. So we have reached to the end of today's session. So if you have any questions, we can quickly take them, or we can ask in the next session.